Hugo Chávez, the fiery Venezuelan leader whose name remains synonymous with socialism, populism, and controversy in Latin America, was born on July 28, 1954, in the small town of Sabaneta in the Barinas state of Venezuela. He came from a modest background, raised in a poor family of mixed indigenous, African, and Spanish ancestry. His parents were school teachers, but the family's financial struggles meant that young Hugo was largely raised by his grandmother. This early life of poverty deeply shaped his worldview, instilling in him a sense of empathy for the marginalized and resentment toward the entrenched elites who dominated Venezuelan politics and wealth. From an early age, Chávez was fascinated with both baseball and politics, idolizing figures such as Simón Bolívar, the great liberator of South America, whose vision of unity and independence would become central to Chávez's own ideology. After completing secondary school, Chávez entered the Venezuelan Military Academy in 1971, where he pursued a career as a soldier while nurturing his political ideas. His time in the military gave him discipline and exposure to political history, particularly Marxism, socialism, and liberation theology, which were gaining ground across Latin America in the 1970s. Unlike many of his peers, Chávez saw the military not as a tool of repression but as a potential vehicle for national transformation. He founded the revolutionary Bolivarian Movement 200 in the early 1980s, a secret leftist group within the armed forces inspired by Bolívar's dream of Latin American unity and independence. During these years, Venezuela was experiencing declining oil prices, rampant inflation, and growing inequality despite its vast petroleum wealth. This environment further radicalized Chávez, convincing him that structural change was necessary. His first major step into the national spotlight came in 1992, when he led a failed military coup against President Carlos Andrés Pérez. Though the coup collapsed and Chávez was imprisoned, his brief televised appearance calling on Venezuelans to continue the struggle made him a popular figure among the poor and disillusioned. For many, Chávez embodied hope for a more just Venezuela at a time when traditional parties were plagued by corruption scandals. After spending 2 years in prison, he was pardoned by President Rafael Caldera in 1994. Chávez used his freedom to build a grassroots movement, blending fiery rhetoric with promises to restore dignity to the poor and to fight corruption. His charisma, plain-spoken style, and use of Venezuelan cultural symbolism distinguished him from the political elite. In 1998, Chávez ran for the presidency on a platform of sweeping reforms. Campaigning as an outsider against the political establishment, he appealed to the masses who had long felt excluded. Promising to rewrite the constitution and give power to the people, he won a decisive victory in December 1998. Once in office in 1999, Chávez set about refashioning Venezuela's political order. He convened a constituent assembly to draft a new constitution, which expanded presidential powers, increased social rights, and extended suffrage. Chávez's vision became known as the Bolivarian Revolution, a blend of socialism, nationalism, and populism aimed at redistributing wealth and challenging U.S. influence in the region. Central to Chávez's rule was his use of Venezuela's vast oil revenues. With crude oil prices soaring in the early 2000s, he redirected state resources toward ambitious social programs called missions. These initiatives provided free healthcare, education, subsidized food, and housing to millions of Venezuelans. Illiteracy rates dropped, poverty declined, and Chávez gained enormous popularity among the poor. His weekly television show, Allo Presidente, became a hallmark of his leadership, where he spoke directly to citizens, often for hours, mixing political speeches, songs, and spontaneous policy announcements. For his supporters, Chávez was a champion of the poor, a leader who had finally given them a voice in a system historically dominated by elites. For his critics, however, he was a populist demagogue who undermined institutions, polarized society, and squandered oil wealth. Chávez's presidency was not without turmoil. In April 2002, he faced a dramatic coup attempt when dissident military officers, backed by segments of the business elite and encouraged by foreign powers, briefly ousted him from office. Massive protests by his supporters and loyal military factions restored him to power within 48 hours, further cementing his image as a leader of the people. This episode deepened his mistrust of opposition forces and the United States, which he accused of supporting the coup. In the years that followed, Chávez became increasingly confrontational with Washington, branding the U.S. an imperialist power. His fiery speeches against American foreign policy and his embrace of figures such as Fidel Castro of Cuba won him admirers across Latin America, while straining relations with the West. Internationally, Chávez styled himself as a leader of a new leftist wave in Latin America, joining forces with leaders like Evo Morales in Bolivia and Rafael Correa in Ecuador. He created regional initiatives such as ALBA Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America to counter U.S. dominated trade blocs. His foreign policy extended beyond Latin America, as he courted relationships with countries like Russia, Iran, and China, presenting himself as part of a global movement resisting Western dominance. Domestically, however, Chávez tightened control over institutions, weakened the independence of the judiciary, and marginalized the opposition. His government took over private businesses, expanded state control of the oil industry, and increasingly relied on loyalty rather than merit in appointments. Despite his confrontational style, Chávez retained enormous popularity at home, winning multiple elections and referendums, often with overwhelming margins. Critics accused him of using state resources to buy support and of eroding democratic norms, while his supporters insisted he was expanding democracy by giving power to the poor. His rule was marked by both genuine achievements in social inclusion and deepening authoritarian tendencies. The polarization of Venezuelan society grew sharper, with the middle and upper classes increasingly alienated from his government. By the late 2000s, Chávez faced mounting challenges. While oil revenues had once fueled his programs, economic mismanagement, corruption, and over-reliance on petroleum began to undermine Venezuela's economy. Inflation soared, shortages of basic goods became common, and crime rates rose dramatically. Chávez responded with further state interventions, but critics argued that his policies created dependency and discouraged investment. His health also became a pressing issue. In 2011, he was diagnosed with cancer, which he fought publicly while continuing to project strength and determination. Even during treatment, he remained a central figure in Venezuelan politics, running for and winning re-election in 2012 against Enrique Capriles. Chávez's final months were marked by his struggle with illness. He underwent multiple surgeries in Cuba, where he maintained close ties with the Castro regime. Despite rumors and speculation, he insisted that he would recover and continue leading Venezuela. However, on March 5, 2013, Hugo Chávez died at the age of 58. His death plunged Venezuela into mourning among his supporters, who saw him as a hero, and into uncertainty about the nation's future. Nicolás Maduro, his chosen successor, assumed leadership, vowing to continue Chávez's Bolivarian Revolution. Hugo Chávez remains one of the most polarizing figures in modern Latin American history. To his admirers, he was a visionary leader who used Venezuela's oil wealth to uplift the poor, restore dignity, and challenge global inequality. To his critics, he was a populist authoritarian who squandered opportunities, dismantled democratic checks and balances, and left behind an economy in crisis. Regardless of perspective, his legacy is undeniable. Chávez reshaped Venezuelan politics, inspired movements across Latin America, and left a mark on global debates about socialism, populism, and resistance to Western hegemony. His larger-than-life persona, passionate rhetoric, and unyielding belief in his mission ensured that his story continues to be studied, celebrated, and debated long after his death. Chávez's life and leadership reflected the complexities of Latin America's struggles with inequality, democracy, and sovereignty, making him one of the most consequential leaders of the early 21st century.